This is lecture 15C. We're going to move now to Sub-Saharan Africa. We haven't talked about it in quite a while. Remember the last time I talked about Sub-Saharan Africa? I talked about the Bantu peoples who developed agriculture and domesticated animals. They lived on the southern edge of the Sahara Desert, the African Sahel. And they did a long series of migrations in the first millennium BC, first and second, where they moved out of modern day Nigeria and Mali, etc., both across to the east and then down the open savannas of East Africa, and then they also moved straight south into the tropical jungles of Central Africa. And they basically spread out throughout Sub-Saharan Africa, and a lot of the language groups, a lot of languages spoken in Africa today are related to Bantu, which is their original language. But I also mentioned that the Bantu culture, because possibly because it was not a hydraulic society, they got ample rainfall, you could just do agriculture wherever, you did not see the development of large empires. And so the Bantu culture tended to remain focused on fairly small units like the village, etc. And you didn't see the creation of large empires. However, with the advent of large-scale trade, you began to see the concentrations of wealth necessary for class stratification, big armies, big cities, etc. And so you see the emergence of empires with the advent of trade. And the initial trade begins across the Sahara Desert, probably in the 700 CE. We're not sure if camels were there already or not, but certainly by the 700s, Arab traders from Morocco, Algeria, etc., are moving across the Sahara Desert on camels to Sub-Saharan Africa. In particular, they're arriving in places that today we would call Senegal or Mali or places like that. And this begins to and this trade. West Africa is a major source at this time of gold production, and so gold is a huge thing the Arab traders want. But you can get salt from various places in the Sahara Desert. You can get ivory from elephant tusks. You can get ostrich feathers, which are highly valued. You could buy slaves. There was an existing slave market in Sub-Saharan Africa. Textiles and furs, especially exotic furs like leopard or cheetah skins or things like that. So these are mostly luxury goods, except for slaves and salt. And they are, because they have to travel on camelback, right? You can't do the ocean-going trade yet. That would wait for Europeans in the 1400s for that to begin. So you have this camel trade across the Sahara Desert, and it begins to become really lucrative, and this leads to concentrations of wealth in Sub-Saharan Africa and the creation of empires. And so the first empire is the Ghana Empire. It probably existed as a kingdom, maybe as far back as the 300s. Certainly by the 500s, it existed as a kingdom. But with the advent of trade in the 700s, it really begins to grow and expand into an empire. And it controls a significant chunk of what we would today call Mali. Ironically, the Ghana Empire is not in modern-day Ghana. And so the Ghana Empire begins to expand dramatically in the 700s and would last until the 1200s. And here you begin to see major trading cities emerge. Some of the cities under the Ghana Empire had 20,000 people in them. You begin to see class stratification, standing armies, all the sorts of things that you expect with an empire begin to appear in the Ghana Empire. Now the Ghana Empire would ultimately collapse because of the Arabs. That in the 1100s there's a religious movement in North Africa that leads to the foundation of a new kingdom called the Almoravid dynasty. And they would actually sweep north into Spain and conquer Spain, but they also sweep south and attack the Ghana Empire. And they significantly weaken the Ghana Empire, but then they pull back. The Almoravids collapse and they get knocked off by the Almohads, and it's a long story up there. But this basically breaks the power of the Ghana Empire, and it would limp along for another 100 years, but essentially it begins to fall apart because the Arabs have done enough damage to it to sort of cripple it but not kill it. Well, in the middle of that, you start to see smaller kingdoms break away from the Ghana Empire, and you begin to see kingdoms emerge around the edges of the Ghana Empire as it gets weaker and weaker. And one of these is the Kingdom of Mali, or the Mali Empire, it's sometimes referred to. Now, we know a little bit about the foundation of the Kingdom of Mali because we have the Epic of Sundiata, which is the story of the founding king of the Kingdom of Mali. And the story goes in the Epic of Sundiata that this king Sumaoro, who is he's from the Soso people, the Sosu people. It depends on how you want to spell it. And he had established a small kingdom, and he had conquered the Malinke people, who, and he was really brutal toward the Malinke people. He was really a brutal ruler, according to the Epic of Sundiata. And so, in response to this, one of the kings of a little city called Niane, which is south of the Ghana Empire, he got knocked off, but his son is a guy named Sundiata. And Sundiata was actually crippled as a child, but he sort of, through total self-discipline, he manages to overcome his disability and become this super strong guy. And he begins to unite the Malinke people against Sumoro. And there's a major, he begins to put together a coalition of people who hate Sumoro. And finally, he puts together an army and confronts Sumoro at the Battle of Krina in 1235 and defeats him, and Sumoro is killed. And this is the foundation of the Kingdom of Mali. And Sundiata would rule the Kingdom of Mali for about 25 years. And then he would be succeeded by 3 of his sons, and it expanded dramatically. And in big part, it took over all the territory of the former Ghana Empire, and then it expanded dramatically and to include new major trading cities like Timbuktu and Yenna. And so the Kingdom of Mali becomes a trade empire. It's really focused on this trans-Saharan trade. It begins to actually establish trade networks farther east across the Sahara Desert to Egypt, amongst other places. Previous trade networks of the Ghana Empire had just gone straight north to Morocco, basically. But now they're traveling both north to Morocco and also across to Egypt. And you can see this wealth play out in the early 1300s when a leader of the Kingdom of Mali, or an emperor, Mansa Musa, who was Muslim, decided he wanted to make the pilgrimage to Mecca. And so he took this massive group of people, tens of thousands of people, went with Mansa Musa they crossed the Sahara Desert in camel caravans, and they went through Egypt, and they went down to Mecca to perform the pilgrimage in Mecca as good Muslims. But along the way, we have documentation that Mansa Musa was spending so much gold that he actually caused the price of gold to collapse in Cairo. His people showed up and spent so much gold that gold dropped in value and stayed depressed in value for months after Mansa Musa left, because there was way too much gold in circulation compared to the things people wanted to buy. And so this really shows you the enormous wealth of the Kingdom of Mali, which was really truly impressive. But the Kingdom of Mali began to decline in the 1400s, and it basically gets eaten out from the inside by the Songhay Kingdom, or the Songhay Empire. This is something we've seen already. For instance, the Parthian Empire had emerged out of the Seleucid Empire in Persia and sort of carved out a little chunk of it and then gradually conquered the rest of it. This is what happens with the Songhay Kingdom and the Kingdom of Mali, is that Songhay basically breaks away. It's founded by a guy named Ali Ber in the late 1400s. On the edge of the Kingdom of Mali, and it carves out a little chunk of the Kingdom of Mali, and then it begins to eat up the Kingdom of Mali, and it gradually would eat up the rest of it, and the Songhay Kingdom would then become about the same size as the Kingdom of Mali, and it would last until the 1700s, but it really it gets pretty brutally beaten up by the Portuguese in the 1600s. And never quite recovers and is gone by the 1700s. But taken all together, these empires show you. I mean, we're talking over 1,000 years, 1,200 years of major empire and major territorial control and huge, a wealthy society with big cities, etc. Carrying out trans-Saharan trade. And they really act as the sort of nexus between the rest of the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa and the North Africa and the Muslim world. And I want to point out, because this is important later if you take History 112, is that one of the major reasons that Europeans, like the Portuguese, figured out how to sail down the coast of Africa was precisely because the Portuguese knew that they were getting lots of products and goods like gold and salt and ivory from sub-Saharan Africa, but it was going through Muslim Arab middlemen in North Africa, and they wanted to bypass those Muslim Arab middlemen, and so they basically wanted to sail to southern Africa directly to trade with places like the Kingdom of Mali and the Songhay Kingdom, and they did so. And then later, of course, this would evolve into major European trade routes in the Indian Ocean. It would evolve to the transatlantic slave trade, etc. But this is the beginning of that huge trade network, what's called the Atlantic Triangle trade, or the Black Atlantic. This is the beginning of it, with the establishment of these African empires that are focused on trade across the Sahara Desert with the Muslim world.